The bright lights of the television studio hummed with a vibrant, electric energy that seemed to pulse in sync with the anticipation of the live audience. Under the shimmering rafters, the stage was set for a spectacle of love, laughter, and the delightful unpredictability of human relationships. The air was thick with the scent of hairspray and the nervous excitement of three couples who were about to put their marriages to the ultimate test of knowledge. One of these brides, a woman with a secret spark of adventurous romance in her heart, harbored a very specific and unusual fantasy. She wanted to make love to her husband while perched on top of a washing machine that had been set to the vigorous spin-dry cycle. Which one of these lovely women was it? Her husband was about to find out, and so was everyone watching, because it was finally time to play the Newlywed game. Gary Kroeger, the charismatic host with a quick wit and a welcoming smile, stepped onto the stage to a thunderous roar of applause. He greeted the viewers with a warmth that made everyone feel like an old friend. He announced that today they were going to meet three brand new, wonderful couples and discover just how well they truly knew each other. The rules of the game were elegantly simple. Gary would ask each couple questions about their partner, and every correct answer would earn them precious points. The couple that managed to accumulate the most points by the end of the journey would win a spectacular second honeymoon. With a flourish, Gary introduced the first pair of contestants. She was 27 years old, and he was 30 years old. Together, they navigated the complex world of finance as owners of their own financial service. They had been walking the path of marriage for exactly 1 year and 1 month. Gary welcomed Felicia and Napoleon Provence to the stage, wishing them the best of luck as they took their seats. The second couple joined them shortly after. She was a 29-year-old research analyst with a keen eye for detail, while he was a 32-year-old assistant athletic director at the University of Southern California. They had been sharing their lives as a married couple for 8 months. Gary introduced Teresa and Mark Ryan, welcoming them to the show and wishing them a successful game. Finally, the third couple rounded out the group. She was a 35-year-old yoga instructor who radiated a sense of calm and balance. He was a 39-year-old business consultant, used to solving problems in the corporate world. They were the most recent newlyweds of the group, having been married for just 2 months. Gary introduced Meghan and Gary McCarver, and the audience gave a big round of applause for all of today's participants. The game began with a playful challenge. Before the show had started, the production team had taken some time with the husbands to record their honest thoughts on video. Gary turned to Meghan and asked her to look at the monitor behind him. He wanted her to watch a clip of her husband, Gary, and then finish his sentence for 10 points. On the screen, Gary McCarver said that to get himself out of hot water, he usually bribed his wife with something specific. The tape stopped there, leaving Meghan to guess the ending. She suggested food, but when that was not quite right, she tried chocolate kisses. Gary Kroeger noted that she was close, very close indeed, as chocolate was indeed edible, but they would have to see the final result later. Next, it was Teresa's turn to face the monitor. Her husband, Mark, appeared on the screen and began to describe the worst present his wife had ever bought for him. Teresa watched intently, her mind racing through the gifts she had given him over the last 8 months. She guessed it was a big, thick, heavy sweater, a choice that seemed to resonate with the physical reality of a poorly chosen garment. Then, Felicia was called upon to test her connection with Napoleon. She gathered herself, ready to play, and watched as Napoleon spoke on the screen. He revealed that the one thing they could never talk about without falling into a fight was the simple act of opening up the mail. However, when the full answer was revealed, it turned out to be something much more personal. Napoleon had actually said it was the issue of Felicia changing her last name to his. Felicia reacted with a shocked exclamation, explaining to the host that she had chosen to hyphenate her name instead. It was a compromise she felt comfortable with, but Napoleon admitted with a smile that he was definitely not happy with that arrangement. Gary Kroeger joked about whether he was starting a little fight right there on national television, but they moved on before any sparks could truly fly. The game then flipped the script. The ladies had also been videotaped, and now it was the husband's turn to earn some points by guessing their wives' responses. Napoleon looked at the screen to see Felicia. She was asked what she liked to fix when it came to her husband's body. Napoleon guessed that she would say his hair. However, the truth was a bit more mundane and humorous. Felicia had actually said she liked to fix his pimples. Mark was then asked about Teresa's level of trust. The screen showed Teresa stating that there was one thing she could never trust her husband with. Mark immediately guessed it was her credit card. Gary Kroeger laughed, noting that this was definitely a characteristic of the 1990s, where the credit card was a symbol of both freedom and potential domestic friction. Finally, Gary McCarver was asked to look at Meghan. The question posed to her was about the dumbest thing her husband had ever asked her to wear during their most intimate moments. Gary thought for a moment and suggested it was probably a black see-through bodysuit thing. He was quite specific in his description. Meghan's actual answer was a tacky teddy. Gary Kroeger pointed out that while a tacky teddy and a see-through thing were not exactly the same, they were very close. At the end of this first segment, the scoreboard was not exactly overflowing with points, although the Ryans had managed to secure 10 points to get themselves on the board. Gary Kroeger encouraged everyone, promising that there were many more opportunities to score after the break. When the show returned, Gary took a moment to get to know the couples a bit better, sharing the charming stories of how they met. He addressed Gary McCarver, mentioning a rumor that he had met Meghan while working at a singles club. Gary McCarver clarified that it was actually at a Christmas singles party. He had been helping out and saw Meghan at the counter, where she was assisting with tickets. He admitted to flirting with her a little bit. However, Meghan playfully gave him a thumbs down, contesting his version of the story. She explained that she was the one sitting at the table, welcoming people and working, while also keeping an eye out for handsome men. She recalled him coming up with a little reindeer decoration, flirting with all the women and complimenting their beauty, their legs, and even their shoes. Meghan remembered thinking that he would make a great father and decided right then that she wanted him. To this day, Gary McCarver denied he was there to meet women, claiming he was just working in the kitchen, but Meghan was convinced he was totally cruising for a date. Regardless of the details, the strategy had worked, and they were now happily married. The conversation then turned to Teresa and Mark. Gary asked about Mark's romantic proposal. Teresa revealed that it had taken place in a rather unusual but cool location, a parking lot located above a parking garage. Mark defended his choice, explaining that they were on their way to a comedy club for her birthday and it just happened to feel like the right place and the right time. He was a man who knew how to seize the moment, even in a parking lot. Felicia and Napoleon had their own unique story. They had almost missed their honeymoon entirely. Felicia recounted how Napoleon had forgotten to bring his birth certificate to the airport. Since they were traveling to St. Martin, the document was absolutely essential. Felicia had told him 1001 times to remember it, but in the rush of the wedding, it had slipped his mind. In a moment of desperation, she called his mother, who rushed to the airport to deliver the birth certificate just in time. The audience offered a sympathetic sound at the mention of the helpful mother-in-law. Napoleon admitted that with all the last-minute chores and running around, he had simply forgotten the one thing he needed most. At this point in the game, only the Ryans had points on the board. Gary Kroeger prepared the couples for the next round, which involved multiple choice questions. He would provide 3 possible answers, and the contestants had to guess which one their spouse had chosen. Each correct match was worth 10 points. He began with Felicia. He asked if Napoleon were to give her a royal title, would it be princess, queen, or a royal pain in the butt? Felicia confidently guessed queen. However, Napoleon had actually chosen the more humorous title, a royal pain in the butt. Felicia was jokingly offended, asking him what was wrong with him. Teresa was asked what Mark would do if he found a $20 bill in the couch after having friends over. Would he call the friends to see who lost it, wait to see if anyone mentioned it, or simply keep the cash? Teresa knew her husband well and correctly guessed that he would keep the cash. Meghan was then asked what kind of face Gary said she had first thing in the morning, a kissy face, a funny face, or a face only a mother could love. Meghan guessed kissy face, and she was correct. Gary explained that Meghan was an early bird while he was a night owl. Every morning, she would wake up with incredible energy, and he would still be trying to find his way to consciousness. The round continued with the men guessing their wives' answers. Gary was asked what Meghan thought would be best for him to do when they had company over for dinner. Should he run the kitchen, help her around the kitchen, or keep his butt out of the kitchen? Gary guessed that he should run the kitchen, asserting that he was always in there doing dishes and helping out. However, Meghan had actually said he should keep his butt out of the kitchen because he always got in the way. Mark was asked how Teresa had rated their last sexual encounter: R-rated, X-rated, or overrated. Mark's eyes lit up as he guessed overrated, perhaps being modest or playful. But Teresa had actually rated it X-rated. She joked that she must have been mistaken, or perhaps she was sleeping during the event. Finally, Napoleon was asked what Felicia said it took to wake him up: a gentle nudge, a good push, or a glass of ice water. Napoleon guessed a gentle nudge. Felicia disagreed, saying she often had to give him a good push or pull the covers away from him just to get him to move over. Napoleon argued that pulling the covers wasn't just about waking him up, but Felicia was firm in her description of their morning routine. As the show went to another break, the couples were starting to find their rhythm, though the scores remained close. When they returned for the third round, the stakes were raised. Gary Kroeger noted that Felicia and Napoleon were still looking for their first points, while Meghan and Gary held 10, and Teresa and Mark led with 20. This round was called the secret round. Gary would reveal a secret or an annoying habit shared by one of the wives, and the husbands had to be the first to raise their sign and say, "That is my wife," to earn 10 points. However, a wrong guess would result in a 10-point penalty. The first secret was about snoring. Apparently, one of the husbands snored so loudly his wife couldn't stand it. After a slight delay, the men realized they might all be guilty, but the point went to the one who identified the complaint. Felicia confirmed she gave Napoleon a gentle nudge whenever he started his nighttime symphony. The next secret involved self-image. One wife believed she looked her absolute ugliest right after a workout. Mark quickly raised his sign, claiming it was Teresa. He described her with hair hanging out and a red face, though he added that in the long term, the exercise was definitely worth it. The third secret was about a specific annoyance: being rushed while getting ready. Mark tried to claim this one for Teresa as well, but he was incorrect, losing 10 points. It turned out to be Meghan's secret. Then came a truly surprising revelation. One of the wives had once spent the entire night in a Marine barracks with a Marine she had only just met. Mark raised his sign with total confidence, and it was indeed Teresa. She explained to the surprised audience that she had simply wanted to see what the inside of a Marine barracks looked like and had stayed a little longer than she had originally planned. She dismissed it as a woman thing, much to the amusement of the crowd. The secrets continued. One wife admitted to lying to her husband about not smoking in the house. Napoleon jumped in, correctly identifying Felicia. He laughed, saying that the smell and the cigarette butts everywhere made the lie very easy to see through. Then, the host brought up the most provocative secret of the day. One wife wanted to make love to her husband on top of a washing machine set on the spin-dry cycle. The men were hesitant at first, but Napoleon eventually claimed the secret for Felicia. The audience cheered as the playful nature of their relationship was revealed. The final secret of the round was about affection. One wife wished her husband was more aggressive and dirty when it came to being affectionate. Mark guessed it was Teresa, but he was wrong again. It was actually Felicia's wish, as she called Napoleon a gentle bear who sometimes needed to be a bit more bold. As the game entered its final phase, the winners were promised a fabulous second honeymoon to Jamaica, spending a week at an all-inclusive romantic resort called Couples. The excitement was palpable. Teresa and Mark were in the lead with 40 points, Meghan and Gary had 10, and Felicia and Napoleon were trailing with -10 points. The final round was a rapid-fire matching game. Gary would give the wives a choice between two things, and the husbands had to match their wife's preference. The points would start at 10 and escalate all the way to 100, meaning anyone could still win. The first question was between CNN and ESPN. All three husbands correctly matched their wives' choices of ESPN or CNN, showing they at least knew their partner's television habits. The next question was for 20 points, Triscuit or wheat thin? Mark correctly guessed wheat thin for Teresa. Gary McCarver guessed Triscuit, but Meghan had chosen wheat thin. Napoleon guessed Triscuit, but Felicia had also chosen wheat thin. For 30 points, the choice was between Mr. Universe and Mr. Rogers. Gary McCarver guessed Mr. Universe, but Meghan had chosen Mr. Rogers. Napoleon and Mark both correctly guessed Mr. Universe for their wives. For 40 points, the couples chose between a dinner party and a beer bash. Napoleon correctly guessed dinner party. Mark guessed beer bash, but Teresa had chosen dinner party. Gary McCarver correctly guessed dinner party. The 50-point question was lights off or lights on. All three husbands, Mark, Gary, and Napoleon, correctly guessed that their wives preferred the lights off, leading Gary Kroeger to remark that many people seem to prefer the dark. The 60-point question was whether the husband takes his time or is done in no time during intimacy. Gary and Napoleon both correctly guessed that their wives said they took their time. Mark, however, guessed that he took his time, but Teresa had once again said he was a man who seized the moment and was done in no time. Before the final 100-point question, Gary Kroeger recapped the scores. In a stunning turnaround, Felicia and Napoleon Provence had moved into first place with 180 points. Meghan and Gary McCarver were in second with 170 points, and Teresa and Mark Ryan were in third with 150 points. The entire game would be decided by the final question. The choice was, the size of the plane or the talent of the pilot. This was a metaphorical question about a man's capabilities. Mark went first and guessed the size of the plane, but Teresa had chosen the talent of the pilot. It was then up to Gary McCarver. If he got it right, he would take the lead. He confidently chose the talent of the pilot, and he was correct, bringing his total to 270 points and putting him in first place. Finally, it all came down to Napoleon. If he could match Felicia's answer, he would win the game and the trip to Jamaica. With the pressure on, Napoleon chose the talent of the pilot. The audience held its breath as Felicia revealed her card. It was a match. In an incredible come-from-behind victory, Felicia and Napoleon Provence were declared the winners. They hugged and celebrated as Gary Kroeger congratulated them on their win. They were going to Jamaica. Gary thanked all the couples for being such great sports and invited the audience to join them again next time for more laughter and surprises on the Newlywed Game. The studio was filled with cheers and music as the credits began to roll, marking the end of another day celebrating the unique and wonderful bonds of marriage.